Here we are again, Tim. It's Friday and another wonderful time to spend time talking about project management principles.
Yes, it is. Isn't it beautiful weekend with the weather coming in? Um, so what's been keeping you up at night about project management these last few weeks? And I know that you're in the middle of advising a group, but what's compelling you about this group?
Well, can I be honest in terms of trying to tie this to our current topic, which I think today is going to
It's
be
exactly where I'm
leadership?
going with that.
Leadership.
Yeah.
I've we've got a mix of system integration vendors, advisory vendors, plus the client, which is a huge government department. And so you can imagine there's a lot of leadership challenges just in being able to maintain some momentum with a team that's that diverse. So yeah, leadership can, and on top of that, by the way, we're remote. So in terms of the remoteness, I'm used to being on site, and a lot
Right.
of times in an advisory capacity, I could walk down the hallway, poke my head in, and find out what's going on. It's harder to do that when you're remote and people forget that they should check in every once in a while.
That's a reminder for me to put on a future session, a future show about the tricks and traps of leading as well as participating in project work remotely, because that's a skill and a half, isn't it?
Oh, it's a skill that I'm learning sometimes the hard way. How about yourself? You got any thoughts around kicking us off with leadership techniques and leadership stories and
Yeah,
leadership?
let's do. And I I was debating talking about like 1990 through 92, and then talking about 2000 through 2003, because that those were the times when I was really around a couple really good leader managers.
You do you
One
do
was
realize you do realize, Tim, that some of our listeners probably weren't in. They were probably in kindergarten in 1992, but this will be
if they were even here, yeah.
yeah. So
But that's all right. That's all right, because this that's fascinating,
yeah.
because leadership doesn't change, and we'll talk about that in a second. So my first manager was my supervisor. He was just a work supervisor, and he was a bit of a grump when I met him. And he was just, get your work done. I want to see some work and see how you work. And that lasted about 3 weeks. And then he said, nope, nope. 8 o'clock in the morning, let's take a break. What? And he said, you cannot think clearly unless you actually relax into the work and place yourself in the work. There'll be times that we have to hit the ground running. And he said, but let's actually start creating this sense. And I was one of the first of about eight in a group that were pulled together to help develop IT. And he would do these breaks until they became habits. And each break, we didn't talk about work at all. We just talked about talking about what's going on and where our minds were. And that gave him an opportunity to observe us in our natural state. And I was thinking, this guy knows something. Now, jet forward to 2000, 2001. I'm about 2/3 of the way through my graduate degree, and I'm a consulting project manager. I was hired because I was a database expert in a group of 300, but they realized that I was a director for a while, and then I was also a project manager for a few years. So they were comfortable with me moving in as a project manager in here, and I found a mentor. And he was actually out on the East Coast while I was here, but I was able to observe him in many, many of his meetings. And he didn't participate in the meeting. He just dropped little ideas. And it was fascinating to see him watch. He didn't tell people anything. He asked questions. And after a while, I said, he's leading them somewhere. Where is he leading them? And it had nothing to do with the project. And it had everything to do with working together, observing the world around you, and learning how to bring people together in a focus so they can actually go to a result. These two perspectives actually led me right to what I learned were the essence of leadership.
You know, it's interesting. I heard a podcast or I heard a video play by a fellow by the name of Darren Hardy. You may have heard of him. He's I think had Success Magazine for a while, or he's a leadership expert anyway. And one of his favorite things, and when you talked about your manager saying, you know, let's relax at 8 o'clock or whatever, however it was that you put it. One thing Darren says is that true leaders, good leaders, use play to motivate. And when he said play, it was kind of like games, you know, sort of games that you can compete with yourself or compete amongst each other in a friendly way, but basically motivate in a way that's just somehow that you don't associate with serious work.
Right. It's my mentor in 2000 through 2003 called it using your project as a petri dish.
There you go. The other thing that Darren Hardy said that I recall, he says, you need to, as a good leader, maybe we'll get into this here shortly, but he said, as a good leader, you need to also be a CEO. And when he defined CEO was their chief emotional officer, meaning that you weren't there just barking orders and giving commands and saying this has to be done by Friday. You were there to listen, to empathize, to help, to support, to move people along, to actually motivate them. Well, again, we've talked about motivation a lot. So it's not that they motivate them, but influence them to motivate themselves to produce good work.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And this is the key. There's two primary topics that come up in leadership education in academic references. Number one, personal awareness of yourself and awareness of how you operate in relationships, and emotional intelligence.
Right.
The ability to understand your emotions and your triggers, and the ability to basically function well in relationships. And those are packed with about 10 or 15 different behaviors and skills. And it's not easy to learn. It's juggling a lot of plates.
Well, and that leads right into another thing that I've learned from watching some of my favorite leaders, those who impacted me the most, was that they were the ones who were the most authentic. They were transparent. They were upfront. There were no, you know, when I said use games to motivate, it was using those kind of games that brought people together, not using gamesmanship to kind of fool people into doing something.
Right.
What I found was those authentic leaders was the ones who I was most motivated to help progress the entire project's success forward.
You know, it's funny when you say authentic and authenticity. It's realness, right?
Yes.
We'll talk about this in just a minute, but there's something called honesty, right? It's applying and understanding the truth, right? And you're never going to know all the truth, but you know the truth that you know today. Now, we learn as a virtue that alignment of the truth with our actions and our deeds leads to integrity. If you look at the word integrity, it comes from the same Latin root as integer, counting numbers, right? They're singular and they are what they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But at the same time, we have this word called integration, which is the coordination and consolidation, unification, being of one whole unit. Your actions and your words reflect the same. And I've thought about this and read about this a lot. When people don't have integrity, it's not that people don't trust them. It's they're confused by him. You're doing one thing and say, what am I supposed to do? You know, if somebody's following somebody without integrity, they have no direction. And so the group's going to fail.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. In fact, we talked somewhat on that in a broader picture last week, I think on the topic of ethics as well, because this all fits into honesty, integrity, ethics. And when you said confusing, how do I know if my leader today is being the authentic person I must follow versus tomorrow playing some game that I'm not sure where that person's
Exactly.
going? Yeah.
So let's actually work. I don't want to define leadership. We'll get there, by the way. I know we'll get there, but let's actually try to put a fence around it. So how do you approach and look at leadership, and what type of set of activities and things do you do in leadership?
That's a good question. So let me start with saying what it's not. How I don't define it as having a position or an authority.
So it's not a job title or a rank.
Correct. It's not. In fact, we're called project managers as job title. Typically, we should be looked at as project leaders in terms of how we influence. So in terms of what it's not the job title, it's not the position or the authority. What it is and how I would behave, and I'll start with what it is in my mind first. I think it's the ability for the leader, to be able to influence, to even guide those who are working with me, maybe to follow me, maybe not to necessarily follow me because of me, but to follow me because of our common vision. And as project managers, our common vision is to seek out the best solution for our clients. So again, I think from that perspective, it's influencing and guiding to follow towards that vision that's cast.
That's exactly right. That's how it's perceived also in the broad, more business as well as project management arena. There's a set of values that reflect this type of leadership, and the leadership is the owner of two things. They own the vision, like you said, and they own the alignment of the group in getting that vision. So, as a manager, and let's actually step back here. Can we actually differentiate between manager and leader? Because I think we better do that first.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think here's a couple of ways that I would define this. First of all, I think managers are accustomed to being the go-to person for the answers, whereas the leader tends to be the one who's asking the questions. And I'm reminded that President Truman had a sign on his desk that said, "The buck stops here." He was a leader. He didn't have a sign on his desk that said, "The answers come from here." That would be a manager, and that would be an ineffective way, I think, of leading. So that's one way, and I'll stop here and let you also answer your own question. But I think managers give answers, leaders ask questions.
I like that. I like that a lot. The way I've found it easiest to understand is that management is tactical.
Yeah.
It takes the data, it analyzes it, it puts it in a checklist. It actually says we were this far off, we need to fix things, right? It provides direction, organization, and control. It's basically keep the business running. You manage the business. Yeah. Now, you lead the people.
Good point.
And leading is more strategic. And again, leading is two things. Leading is focusing and creating and energizing the vision, while you're also engaging the group and the individuals in alignment towards that. So actually management and leadership do go hand in hand. And as project managers, we have to embrace both sides of that coin.
We do. But I think as I progressed in my career, I found it much more rewarding to be the leader. Mm-hmm. I mentioned before, it's like a manager will say, "I need this done by Friday." They basically dictate the task or the plan, or this is what we need. And that's to your point in terms of keeping the lights on. We need this done by Friday. Right. A leader, however, in that same situation would cast the vision. so that I,
Right.
as the person who's following that leader, would say, oh, in order to meet that vision, I have to get this done by Friday.
So another way to look at this is you can delegate management. You cannot delegate leadership as a project
Yeah,
manager.
that's true.
This is a thing. You can't step away from leadership as a manager, as project manager.
Yeah. Well, and here I'm going to throw you another one at you that I think is a huge difference. You know, when I was a project manager,
Uh-huh.
I was always required by my leadership or by my executive people to develop subordinates, to
Mhm.
develop my team, right? To develop them in their careers, to develop them as individuals. That was my job as a manager, besides getting the job done.
Right.
What I finally figured out was that if I was going to advance, my job wasn't to develop subordinates. My job was to develop leaders.
Right.
Because if I could develop that next leader, I could leave and let the leader also propel themselves in their career.
Right. And people, as they're growing, don't push you out. They push you up.
Oh, that's right.
That's exactly right. So this is the leadership that we're looking at, and getting back to defining leadership. So we have a set of behaviors and principles that help us with the vision and creating that cohesiveness we call culture in a group. We have stewardship, we have accountability of the work environment and the group, we have stakeholder engagement, we have focuses on value and quality and integration and tailoring and complexity and risk and adaptability and all these things, right? And we use all of those to focus on the work that the team is doing and getting it more and more in alignment with that vision. It's not that we're actually doing the work, it's we're actually hurting, and we're creating a focused and providing energy for the group as they're progressing through the work itself.
Oh, absolutely. And even as we provide energy, it's our job not to suck the energy out of the room. So, so one of the things you talked about in terms of taking, I think you said, was it responsibility or whatever? But if we learn as leaders to always take 100% responsibility, someone on my team may have messed up badly. That's okay. That's on me, because I wasn't fostering that person as well as I should have been. So from a behavioral construct, in order for people to be able to follow me, I have to be able to always show no excuses, take 100% responsibility, and then teach my team even as we fail in certain aspects. So it all comes down to exactly who are you going to follow? The person who takes that responsibility or the person who says it's not my fault?
That's right. And the thing is, you can't tell people to follow.
That's true.
You can actually grow yourself to turn yourself into a person that people want to follow.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going to manage. And that's all right for a certain set of projects. If you want to do that, that's fine, but it's not going to actually help you grow and mature into the work that you vision earlier in your career.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other side of that whole coin too is that as you work with your staff, what you're trying to learn, what at least what I found is that the more I can collaborate with my staff, the better decisions I make. Now, the decision may still be mine to make, and I may accept some of the collaborative ideas I get from my team, and I may reject others. Doesn't mean they were bad. It just didn't mean that. Just doesn't mean they don't fit the situation. But I collaborate with the whole team and then make the decision, as opposed to the manager who basically makes the decision and then tells the team what they're going to do.
Yeah, let me give you a suck the air out of a room experience I created. Okay. There were about 35 of us. We were with a Fortune 50 corporation, and the CIO was saying, okay, that was a nice set of 80 slides you took through us. Now everybody get up from your naps. And she pointed to me. I was the financial analyst actually on this work. And she said, blah, 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 blah. Okay, Tim, cut it to the quick. tell me, you're in my chair. What am I supposed to do? I didn't take my own advice. I actually treated myself as a CIO, and I thought, here, do this, 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 and this. CIO loved it. She got everything she needed out of a 3-hour meeting in 3 minutes. It's exactly what she wanted, but it sucked all the air out of the room. My project manager was left without face. The sales rep saw 6 weeks of effort actually crumbling before his eyes. And then everybody else in the room was saying to themselves, why was I here? That 2.5 hours were totally wasted. Now, I was not the project manager or the CIO, but I was a leader. I was an expert leader. And I made a gross mistake there in stating something, because as a leader, if you say something first, everybody thinks that's the decision and nobody else is going to think.
Right. Yeah, because you're the smart guy in the room, right?
That's right. You're the expert leader. And it's easy for us to actually slip into that mode. But as a leader, we're constantly having to think about our amygdala and our cerebral cortex, and have our cerebral cortex pump the brakes.
So if we're kind of looking at the behaviors, and if we have, I think we both agreed on the fact that leadership is not defined by your position or your job title, rather your ability to influence. What do you think is why do you think leadership is so important for, let's start with the team. Why do you think it's so important for the team?
Well, okay, so groups naturally form, right? You have a bunch of people. They don't know how to work together. They've never worked together. They have to get familiar with each other's skills, and they pull together, and then they sort of figure things out. And over time, working together, if they really focus on it, they get to real work. The group does the work, and since we've been hunter-gatherers, this is one of the super strengths of humans. But if you're a leader, you know this, and you can take your group through the rough patches and use some facilitation, and you can use some persuasion and use conflict management and get them over the rough areas and through the fun areas, and you can get them to a level very quickly where they can perform effectively. And while you're doing that, you can maintain the focus so people don't get distracted.
Yeah, I'm reminded of several years ago. You may remember this too. I think it first came in the Super Bowl. It was one of those commercials, and you had a whole bunch of cats that were jumping around with cowboys on horses, changing them, and they were trying to herd cats. Here's how well that commercial was in terms of looking at the herding of cats. That's how I look at teams without leadership. They're all over the place. That commercial was so well done. I didn't know who it was they were advertising for. It turns out later I did do my research, and it was EDS back at that time.
Oh yeah.
And secondly, I wasn't quite sure the point of the commercial at that point because I didn't know who it was. It was such a well done commercial, but that has stayed with me over the years, thinking that I, as a leader, need to provide that point of that spear, creating that focus for my entire team, saying, here is our objective. Now let's go take that objective as a team. And as a result of that, instead of having cats that are all over the place, unherdable, I have nice, tame cats, lions perhaps, but tame and all walking and working in the same direction.
Yes. And again, this is what is tricky. Number one, it's hard to do this because humans have their own minds and they want to go in their own directions. Number two, we're really not taught how to do this. We don't have leadership training when we're in kindergarten or grade school or even high school. Even in university, it's not until you get into these real niche areas like business and finance where we really start talking about leadership, or even psychology. And it's really strange that we don't teach this more.
So why do you think leadership's important for the leader himself or herself?
Because you need to lead yourself.
That's true.
Bottom line. And you have to acquire the skills in order to be able to herd your own personal cat of you. You have to enforce discipline. You have to confront. You have to influence and motivate yourself. Before you start doing this with others, you got to learn those skills yourself, or you're not going to get anywhere. And that's the beautiful thing. All of these wonderful, develop yourself influencers on YouTube and grow yourself. What they are is just saying, lead yourself, learn to lead yourself, learn to capture your vision, learn to focus yourself, and keep that head of the spear of yourself in the same direction. And that's really difficult to do.
Well, and what I found, what the benefit for me when I did a good job as a leader versus not so good job, there was a huge sense of satisfaction in a job well done, not because I did it, but because I was able to influence those working with me to do the good job, to always focus towards that particular end result.
Now,
And
go ahead.
The other thing I found is that one of the benefits to me as I developed my better leadership skills was I had fewer non-essential issues to deal with. Less griping, less complaining, and that.
Yeah, it makes your job easy.
Yeah.
So Epictetus says that we're all entitled to hard work. We are not entitled to the rewards. Okay. And he said, that's just life.
Yeah.
Rewards are probability. Work is a fact. But and he actually echoed Aristotle in this, saying that fulfillment of being a good leader is the ultimate reward. And this is something you get even before your leadership finishes. The second thing that you're saying is leadership makes things easy.
Or at least easier.
Yeah. Well, again, discipline. Brushing your teeth every day means that when you're later in life, you don't have thousands of dollars of bills and you don't have a funny looking mouth, and if you do push-ups and sit-ups and exercise every day, you're not going to have health issues.
Okay, now you've gone too far. Now you've gone too far.
I know, but you know what? If you really put your mind to it, this is the direction leadership takes you.
Yeah.
It's hard.
So I'm getting, there's this age-old question: are leaders made or born? And I know I'm getting the impression, well, I'll see what you think first, but I'm getting a very strong impression. What do you think?
Oh, they're made. No, they're made. Everybody can learn, but it's like being a golfer. Not everybody can be Elite Trevino, but everybody can be a better golfer than they thought they could be. Okay. Yeah. And it's like being a leader. You're never going to be Marcus Aurelius. You're never going to be Dwight Eisenhower. You're never going to be all these wonderful people that we aspire to be. These guys are one in a million, but you can be a better leader than you could expect. It is a learned capability. And I have many white papers that give a formal justification for this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I did read somewhere that there were some studies done. I don't know how scientific these were, but some studies were done that approximately 1/3 of leaders had natural born tendencies for leadership, but 2/3 were just work at it, learn it, develop it, work at it hard. So
well, and even what we think of as natural born leaders, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was a dapper Dan, and he was a proper young rich man, and his community didn't want him and didn't think of him being in there, but he had a strange quirk that forced him to be in with common people so he could understand and relate with them. And then you have my favorite, Teddy Roosevelt, who had asthma as a young kid. And he, instead of playing out sports like he wanted to and his dad wanted to, he had to mess around with stamps and study the world with his mom through history and geography. And it was only until he overcome his health issues through his teenage and his early adult years that he actually came into who he was. He was never born to be a leader.
Yeah, and I remember even from my high school days, in high school, is probably the place you always go back to, right? I remember those extrovert kids, the ones who really kind of everybody wanted to be around them. You thought, man, these are the natural leaders. And in many ways they were, because people followed them. Largely, I think, because they were good looking, perhaps. They were fun to be around. They were charismatic.
Mhm.
But it's interesting, when I look back at those leaders from my high school days, I don't see a single one of them having become a leader in their community or their career or anything else. Not that they didn't become great workers or great career people, but they didn't end up being in those, in those leadership positions. So I think sometimes we ascribe too much to the extrovert, too much to the popular person, and not enough to their absolute basic skills of influencing people and guiding them along.
There's a personal development model called range. There are people who are prodigies in their skills, and they have early awards, and they go, 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 and that's all they have. And they're very focused, but they're also very limited in their experience. And then there are people like Tim who are putterers and try a little bit of this, it was all right. Try a little bit of that, it was all right. And they don't really have a direction. They're directionless. But something happens in the mid-20s to late 20s that galvanizes us all. And it seems that all of these general skills that you pick up by meeting diverse people and diverse things and learning things, not just what they are, but how they fit together, seems to actually give us a greater perspective and gives us the reason and the purpose and the motivation to actually, in this next phase of our life, actually do leadership and develop leadership properly.
It's interesting. You just made me think of something back that I learned, and I'm going to misquote this, but I want to paraphrase this anyway, because I think it makes sense. Someone said one time, be aware or be noticeable. No, not noticeable. Be cognizant of your A students, because they will become your professors and your research people. But really be aware of your C students, because they're going to become your boss. And it's and if you think about that, it has nothing to do again with brilliance or scholastic acumen or any of that. It has to do with your wanting to develop those skills within yourself that influences people to do the job that you were assigned to do.
And pulling this all together, leadership and the discovery of leadership is the observation that there are a set of skills that help me focus and get the determination and get the reason to actually get better at things outside of my natural abilities. And that's where people start learning what real leadership is.
So if I'm a young IT person, and we are typically speaking to project managers, though not exclusively, but if I'm a young IT person right now who wants to get into project management, project leadership, I should say, I'm making this sound like it's not very easy. So when did you first realize that this isn't really truly very easy, but it's in many ways it's simple?
In the early 2000s, in my early consulting experience, I observed and watched my mentor, and we talked, and I asked him questions, and he confided in me a little bit. And he said, no, you don't become a project manager for the fame or the glory or the paycheck. It's harder. It takes more effort. You have to set aside your personal ego. You have to set aside your opinion and your perception about how things are going. And it is a real hit to who you are. And a lot of people, as they, learn how much of project management is relationships, it can be quite the existential crisis.
It can be. In fact, I grew up on the fact that project management or projects, IT projects, are largely composed of three main legs, kind of still legs of a stool. And that would be people, process, and technology. And, anytime I've seen difficulties on projects or situations where projects fail, it's rarely the process and it's rarely the technology. So when someone says, what's the hardest part about being a leader? I would often, jokingly, but I don't say this anymore, but I would often say, if it wasn't for the people, this job would be fun.
Yeah, exactly. And if it weren't for people, this project would be easy. I've quoted that myself early in my teaching career. Now, what's strange is there was an observation and a movement in around 2005 in software development that said, we got this all wrong. We're engineering solutions that are brilliant, that are perfection, and yet they're failing. It's because we're not looking at the human element. And it started a movement called human-centered design. Now, it had actually started earlier with W.E. Deming. And before him, he and Peter Drucker had been talking about this, but this has always been an undercurrent, an underlying thread. A nation is not about its GDP, it's about its people. A community is not about the buildings and roads and lights on the street, it's about the people. And this observation can often rattle people to their foundations.
Well, the other thing is when I would jokingly say leadership would be a breeze if it wasn't for the people, I would in the next breath say, but then this person wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for the people. So
that's right. That's our purpose.
Yeah.
Is not to have perfect projects. Our purpose is to provide something of value to the people who desperately need it.
So if I was, though, to tell our listeners, especially the younger listeners who want to become project managers or who are in their early stages of project management careers, I think the one thing that I learned, the part that was hardest for me to learn, but that I took upon myself to truly learn, is to begin to feel comfortable with the uncomfortable. Because no matter what we do in IT projects, no matter what we do in life, change is inevitable. You're always put in situations where it is uncomfortable to be in those situations. But until you learn to be comfortable in those situations, in order to be able to deal with them, either by yourself or with the help of your team, it will always be a hard job.
Yeah. And think about it, think about COVID and the people who were leading the corporations as we got these major lockdowns from country to country to country. How are we going to function? What does our supply chain look like? And these are the great unknowns. I know that every project is not that critical, but the projects that actually were spun off because of the lockdown and because of the pandemic, actually are indicative and great case studies for showing what leadership can do. But you're right, be comfortable with uncomfortability, and also, be able to understand human nature and human behavior and how we function. And that is not an easy task.
Right. The other one I heard was feel the fear and then do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I've been in situations, when you're managing a project that's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, even in the tens of millions of dollars, you slip up and lose a month and that costs the company $1 million. That hurts. That's scary stuff. But you feel the fear and you do it anyway, because that's what you've been assigned to do. And that's what you do. That's when you bring your team along and make it happen.
Yeah, Aurelius and Epictetus said that the reward and the success is on the other side of the obstacle, but you have to push through.
Yeah.
And even if it isn't great fear, even if we're not fearing mortality and we're not fearing the collapse of anything, there's still frustration and doubt and confusion and a lot of uncomfortable emotions. And this is where a leader can actually come in and help the group process these things quickly. This is the most effective use of a leader. And again, a leader doesn't have to be the CEO or the project manager. They are just a catalyst to come into the group and help the group process all of this yuck in order to actually get to work and put the ideas together and the innovations so you can actually overcome.
And I will admit that even as in a leadership position, there's been times that I've had to inspire my team when I didn't feel particularly motivated. I had situations where people that I was trying to inspire and bring them along didn't want to be brought along. I've been in situations where I've had to be positive in the face of all kinds of negativity. So those are the hard parts of leadership, but that's why we develop our leadership skills and abilities to be able to handle those situations.
I walk into a class that I've been teaching over 14 years, well, 2004, over 18 years now. And I know what they're going to say. And I teach and espouse values and leadership all the time. And people say, it doesn't work in my organization. This is not the way things are. I don't have time. I'm not given permission. And it's wonderful. I know, and I cannot contest that. All I can do is actually teach and have them observe how the components and the techniques and the sense of leadership work, and have them participate and be around somebody who actually demonstrates leadership. Now, this is my question to you. I have a lot of students that say, I'm never given a chance to become a leader. I'm a project manager, but they tell me you got to get the work done. There's no time to be a leader. What's good advice?
Oh, that's easy. I just go back to my initial definition that when we started talking about this, that leadership is not a positional, it's not a position in a company or a job title. Leadership is developing your ability to influence others. And I think I've shared on this podcast before that I have had teams where a person on my project team, perhaps a person who came right out of school, had some natural leadership, had some developed leadership tendencies, became a natural leader, or even though they didn't have the position, because they came alongside their fellow team members to help them with something, to show them how to do something else, to deal with an emotional situation that they might be having. And when I look at that, the leadership, those people were strong leaderships and excelled in their careers to eventually earn the title of project manager or project leader, but it had nothing to do with their position. They were not given permission to be a leader. They just were a leader.
Right. In Star Trek, The Next Generation, at the Starfleet Academy, there's this gardener. He was played by the same guy who played My Favorite Martian back in the 1950s and 1960s. Okay. And he's a simple man and he has no rank, and he just is out with the rose bushes and flowers. But somehow everybody ends up going and asking him questions. Now, this is what you're saying. Lead yourself, practice and demonstrate your leadership skills for yourself. Get yourself and your house in order, and then people come to you. This is not magic. This is just simple human behavior. This is what leadership is. It's not given to you. You earn it.
Well, and if you think about those situations, and I've had people on my team who are just industrious, strong developers or strong analysts, but they would bury themselves in their cubicle and they would almost fortify themselves in their cubicle so that they were unattainable by their team members.
Mhm.
They never developed those leadership skills and they never excelled into any leadership position because they isolated themselves when they had a chance to be that leader. I was watching my grandchildren a couple of years ago on a playground, and another child who we didn't know fell off of one of the playground equipment pieces and hurt themselves. Well, one of my granddaughters immediately ran over and comforted her, looked at her skinned knee, looked at those sorts of things. And when she did so, she was able to comfort this young girl such that the young girl soon was up and playing again. Now, did that demonstrate leadership to me as an 8-year-old? Absolutely. Because what they did was they looked at the common good of their fellow team member, in this case, and brought them back alongside and then pushed on from there and started to play again. So we can start those leadership skills at the beginning of our career, even if we're never given the position or the title.
That's the problem with leadership. That's the real issue that we're struggling with. Number one, how do I put the needs of the group ahead of my needs? This is complicated and difficult. Now, how do I influence others to put the needs of the group ahead of their personal needs? And this is really complicated. And this is where leadership is distrusted, because everybody is taught in one way or another between the age 3 to 20 is taught that somewhere along the line, somebody's going to take advantage of me, or I'm going to get burned, or a relationship's going to get south, or I'm going to be fired even though I'm the hardest worker. And leadership itself takes a hit because human behavior actually seems to teach us the opposite.
You've heard the saying, it's a dog eat dog world out there, right? So if it's a dog eat dog world, why would I help the other dog? But if you do help the other dog, pretty soon you can work. This is a bad analogy, but pretty soon you can travel in a pack and make things happen. So,
and that's the beautiful thing. This is the superpower of groups. You have people with individual skills, and they don't have the same skills, and the skills overlap. And that way, if you do have the ability to work as a self-organizing team, you're much more powerful and you have potential for much greater success. You're not going to bring home a rabbit. You're going to bring home 5 or 6 deer for 3 families. Now, a leader understands this, and a leader understands that you're not sacrificing yourself. You're sacrificing your immediate satisfaction, and you're pushing out your actual need fulfillment a little later in order to ensure that the group exists long enough to get those rewards.
I'm on a project right now that's using Agile, and you mentioned self-organizing teams, and I've been watching young people right out of college begin to take leadership positions because as part of the self-organizing team, they were able to put themselves into a position with their abilities, with their skills, with their knowledge, with their nighttime learning, because they didn't do everything on the job, brought it back to the project and were able to excel. And I've seen that in 3 or 4 different individuals now who, quite frankly, are right out of college and are making a name for themselves.
Well, this actually is becoming front of mind knowledge. This is no longer, hidden stuff. It's not a deep dark secret like it was in our generation. It
Right.
actually is being talked about a lot. We have Sapolsky and we have Huberman out on YouTube. We have influencers like Tim Ferriss and Tom Bilyeu and Ryan Holiday, who are actually promoting this and have been promoting it for the last 10 or 15 years. This is a really great time for someone to actually be learning how to be a leader, because all of the information is not only out there, it's free and accessible. And these thought leaders, international, global thought leaders, are available for us on a one-to-one basis.
You just hit on something that reminded me of one of my frustrations earlier on in my career. And that was the expectations of people on my team who expected the company to provide some sort of training. Like, why aren't I getting 2 weeks off for training? Why can't I be trained in this? Why? And it's one of those situations that said, you know what, you'll get your training as we need it, because first of all, you're working for a corporation. The corporation isn't working for you. But secondly, there are all kinds, you've just mentioned now with what's online even, but there is so much ability for people to be able to learn on their own that doesn't have to fit within the 9 to 5 job or in our case, probably the 7 to 7 job. But there's opportunities to learn to be a leader without having to have the company pay for some educational course, which probably doesn't pertain to you, because the same course on leadership that they give you as an IT professional is the same course they gave to the Holiday Inn for their cleaning staff professionals. So it's like, just get out there and make it happen for yourself.
Yeah, and to finish off this conversation, a lot of these classes give you a little ribbon to go with all the other ribbons you have, and that's an achievement, and it's done. But that's not what leadership is. Leadership is an ongoing activity that has to do with recognition. It's the behaviors that are day to day. And this is the hard thing. We're used to, especially in technology, say, I'm certified in Microsoft technologies, I'm certified in databases, right? You're never certified as a leader.
That's true. One of the signature stories I love to tell, I won't tell the whole story here because it's used for dramatic effect, but I love to tell this in my public speaking gigs. And I often tell, when I was a brand new analyst, had just been promoted into an analyst position, and was working on a fairly large project, and the funding people from the funding organization came in to see how the project was doing. And my boss asked me to prepare the slide deck. Back then, the slide deck was literally pieces of plastic that it wasn't nice PowerPoint. But anyway, I prepared the slide deck and I said, okay, let's go through this. He said, no, you have to be satisfied with it. I'm on vacation. And so he put me as a brand new budding analyst in front of the funding agency's representative to give the status of the project and how money was being used.
I've been there.
Here's the story I tell. After I managed to pack 15 minutes of material into 2.5 hours, the only person left standing the only person who was still awake after I finished was me. And that's because I was standing. And the third thing that happened as a result of that was I went and I joined an organization called Toastmasters. I realized that if I was going to be effective in any kind of briefing, in any kind of speaking, in anything, I had to have some training. Did my company send me to this organization? Did my company pay for me to join this organization? No. And here it is 30 some years later, I'm still with that organization and I'm still practicing on a weekly basis.
Right. It's again, when you sign up to be a leader, you don't sign up for a ribbon or a badge. You sign up for work, and you might get a reward out of it at the end. Or the best leaders of us all know that the greatest work we'll never see the end to it. And somebody else will get the rewards, and we are happy about that.
Well, and in this case, the example I just used, people go, what's that got to do with project management? It has everything and nothing. It's a communication process. I failed miserably as a communicator to people who held my paycheck in their hands, basically. And so as a result of that, I realized if I was going to be any kind of leader in my profession, even as an IT, and back then I was fairly technical, even as that, I still had to learn how to communicate well.
And that's the problem with leadership. You hit it right in the center. It's a group of habits and behaviors and principles and perceptions and opinions that shape the way you work with yourself and you work with others in order to create and nurture and grow a vision and also lead people to that vision.
Yeah. So if I wanted people to walk away with anything from this hour-long podcast, I would say, learn the fact that leadership is not a job title. Learn the fact that leadership is up to you to develop for yourself, and that you can be a leader where you're positioned right now, just by working and influencing those around you.
Right.
How's that
right,
for summarizing an hour?
Perfect. That is perfect. You landed the plane right where it should be. Thank you, Merv. This has been really good conversation today. Now, if we have questions for you, or if we want to contact you, where do we go?
The best place is obviously is LinkedIn. That's where we, and I shouldn't say obviously, the best place is LinkedIn, where we as professionals like to kind of connect. I just had, in fact, a person connect with me yesterday that we hadn't talked probably in 15 years. She found me, we're connecting, and we're about to start a new conversation. So it's interesting how that area can truly create those relationships and ongoing conversations around such topics as we have here with project management.
Yeah, and the same for me. You can look me up over at LinkedIn. There are some you can find both Merv and myself out on YouTube, and if you watch these things, it's always great when you comment. And again, if you have questions, if you want us to cover a topic, or if you want us to respond to an issue that you're working on, we'll consider it and provide it in the comments, and we'll take it from there.
And even if you disagree with us, we'd love to hear that, because we're still learning. Tim and I are still learning.
Yeah, it looks like we're silver haired, but it's not. It's just that we're going so fast, the color's falling behind.
That's a good one. I was going to say it's my studio lighting.
Thanks again, Merv. And thanks everyone for participating in this. And like I said, if you have any questions, reach out. We do have some news in the next 2 weeks. We may be taking off a couple weeks at the end of the year to prepare for the next year, the next season of this show. But again, we're always here if you need us.
Absolutely. All right. Until next week, Tim.
Thanks again, Merv.